Welcome, friends. I'm so glad you found your way here tonight. Before we begin our journey together, I hope you've made yourself comfortable. Perhaps you're lying in bed, or maybe you're resting on a favorite chair with soft blankets nearby. Whatever your setting, I encourage you to fully settle in. Close your eyes if you'd like, or keep them gently open, whatever feels most natural. This story we're about to explore has waited thousands of years to be told, and it will be waiting tomorrow as well, so there's no need to rush through it. If you enjoy peaceful history and the kind of storytelling that eases the mind, please do consider subscribing. For now, though, let's leave the modern world behind and travel back together to a time of ancient temples, flowing rivers, and the quiet wisdom of scribes who knew how to record history with careful hands. Tonight, we're traveling back thousands of years to ancient Egypt, to a place where time moved differently than it does now. We'll follow the footsteps of someone who lived in the shadows of great monuments, who worked by lamplight and understood the weight of preserving knowledge. Our story begins on a night much like any other, in the last hours before dawn, when a temple scribe sits alone with his work, listening to the silence that only night can bring. Chapter 1. The temple at dusk, the temple of Thoth, stands against the darkening sky, its massive stone columns becoming silhouettes as the sun sinks lower beyond the western cliffs. The Nile River, which has flowed past this place for countless generations, continues its eternal journey, its water turning from gold to copper to deep purple in the fading light. The air is beginning to cool, though it still carries the warmth of the day, and the dust that settled on the stone courtyard during the afternoon remains suspended in the gentlest of breezes. A man walks through the temple's outer courtyard, and though you cannot see his face clearly in this dimming light, you can hear his footsteps, not hurried, but measured and purposeful. He is Amenhotep, a scribe of the temple, and he has walked this path countless times. His feet know the way without his eyes needing to guide them. The stones beneath his feet are smooth, worn by centuries of priests and scribes and worshippers who came before him, and they will be worn smooth by countless more who will come after. The walls of the temple rise around him like the embrace of some ancient stone guardian. They are carved with hieroglyphs that glow in the last rays of sunlight, sacred symbols that have told stories and held prayers, and recorded the names of pharaohs for generations beyond counting. These are not decorations, though they are beautiful. They are a language, a way of speaking to eternity, of ensuring that nothing important is ever truly forgotten. As Amenhotep moves deeper into the temple, the shadows grow longer. The columns that seemed so bright and clear in the daylight now stand like sentries, watching over the spaces between them. The floor, which radiates heat during the day, begins to release that warmth slowly into the cooling evening. soon the temple will be cold, and Amenhotep will need to wrap his linen garments more closely around himself. But for now, he simply walks, listening to the sounds of the temple as it transitions from day to night. The courtyard has emptied of other people. The common priests finished their evening prayers some time ago, and the high priests have retreated to their chambers. The temple guards walk their routes on the outer walls, but here in the heart of the temple, there is only Amenhotep and the deepening shadows. A few lamps are being lit by servants. You can see them moving like shadows among shadows, carrying small flames in clay vessels, lighting the paths that the priests will walk during the night prayers. The air smells of stone and dust, and something else, something ancient and sacred. Perhaps it is the scent of offerings made earlier in the day, or perhaps it is simply the particular smell that temples have, acquired over centuries of prayers and rituals and the weight of human hope. Amenhotep has never tried to describe this smell to anyone, and yet he knows it better than he knows his own face in the mirror. Above him, the first stars are beginning to appear in the sky, though the sun has not completely vanished beyond the cliffs. The day is retreating, and the night is preparing to take its place. In the temple, the transition is already clear. The light that poured through the high windows during the day is fading, and the lamps are taking over their ancient duty of pushing back the darkness. The flames flicker and dance, casting moving shadows on the carved walls. Amenhotep passes the great pylons, the massive gateway towers that stand at the entrance to the temple's inner sanctum. They are covered with carved figures of pharaohs and gods, their expressions frozen in stone for eternity. He does not stop to look at them, though he could describe every detail of every carving from memory. He has spent his life documenting such things, recording them in drawings, and in carefully composed written descriptions on papyrus. His eyes are trained to see details that others miss, to understand the meaning behind symbols, to read the stories written in stone. The courtyard opens before him, ringed by more columns, and here the last rays of sunlight still reach, painting the stone in soft shades of amber and rose. A small pool of water sits in the center of the courtyard, used for ritual purification. In the fading light, its surface is smooth and still, reflecting the darkening sky like a mirror. Amenhotep pauses for a moment to look at this reflection, as he has paused many times before. There is something peaceful about seeing the sky mirrored in water, something that reminds him that all things reflect all other things, that the cosmos is woven together in ways both seen and unseen. He moves on, past the pool, toward the area where the scribes work. This is not the grandest part of the temple, not the place where great ceremonies take place, or where the pharaoh himself might enter to commune with the gods. This is a quieter place, a working place, dedicated to the practical business of recording and preserving. The walls here are less elaborately decorated, though they are still carved with hieroglyphs that speak to the importance of the work done in this space. The evening is moving into full night now, and Amenhotep feels the subtle shift that always comes at this hour. The temple seems to breathe differently when the sun is gone. The sounds are quieter, softer. You can hear the night insects beginning their songs, sounds that seem to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. The Nile continues its quiet flow, heard now as a distant whisper rather than a presence. And above it all, there is the particular silence that only ancient places know, the silence of stones that have stood for longer than human memory, of spaces that have contained centuries of prayers. Chapter 2. The scribes' chamber, the room where Amenhotep works, is small compared to the grand halls of the temple, but it is perfect for its purpose. The walls are painted a soft cream color, and they have been carefully maintained over many years. Shafts of what little light remains from the evening still enter through high, narrow windows, but these are quickly fading. Soon the room will be lit entirely by oil lamps, and already Amenhotep is moving to prepare for this transition. Along one wall stand shelves, and on these shelves rest papyri, hundreds of them, rolled carefully and labeled with small tags of woven reeds. Each one represents a record, a document, a conversation between the present and the past. Some are as old as Amenhotep himself, written by scribes who are long dead. Others are new, their papyrus still pale and unmarked. They represent the history of the temple, the records of daily operations, the accounts of offerings made and received, the texts of prayers and rituals, the histories of priests and administrators who have served here. A low table stands in the center of the room, and on this table is where Amenhotep does his work. It is not an elaborate piece of furniture, just a simple wooden surface, worn smooth by decades of use, stained in places where ink has been spilled and never quite completely washed away. These stains are like a history written in the wood itself, a record of all the documents created here, all the words that have been written on this surface. To one side of the table are Amenhotep's tools. There are brushes made from papyrus fibers, worn down to different lengths depending on how long they've been used. Some are quite short now, nearly at the end of their useful lives, and Amenhotep will need to prepare new ones soon from fresh papyrus plants. There are small wooden cups containing different inks, black ink made from carbon and gum, red ink used for emphasis, or for writing certain important words and headings. There is also a stone palette for mixing inks, and small water vessels for keeping the brushes moist while working. The papyri themselves are stacked carefully, and as Amenhotep moves around the room, preparing for the night's work, He gently touches one of them, a scroll that he has been working on for several days. It contains a record of the temple stores for the past month. How much grain has been received, where it has been stored, how much has been used for daily rations, how much is being reserved for the storage houses. Such work may seem dry and uninteresting to those who hear about it, but for Amenhotep, it is sacred. Without such records, the temple could not function. Without such records, the future would not know what the past accomplished. He settles onto a low cushion, the only concession to comfort in this austere room, and waits as a servant enters carrying oil lamps. The young man, who cannot be more than 12 or 13 years old, moves with the careful efficiency of someone who has done this task many times. He places the lamps on small stands around the room, positioning them so that their light falls on the work table without casting harsh shadows. Oil lamps are marvelous things, really, if you think about them. A simple clay vessel filled with oil, with a wick made from papyrus or rush fibers. And somehow this simple combination creates light that is warm and gentle and entirely sufficient for reading and writing. The lamps are not bright lights, as you might think of light in the modern world. They are softer, more intimate. The flames flicker slightly with any movement of air, and this constant, gentle motion means that shadows on the walls are never entirely still. It creates an atmosphere of quiet contemplation, of peace. The smell of the oil sesame oil, or sometimes oil from the castor bean plant, fills the room with a pleasant, warm fragrance that somehow complements the smell of papyrus and ink. As the servant leaves and Amenhotep is finally alone, he sits for a moment without moving, without beginning his work. This is a moment he treasures, a moment of transition between the day and the night, between his duties in the temple's daily life and the work of recording and preserving that he does in the evenings. The lamps cast a warm glow over everything, the wooden table, the papyri on their shelves, his own hands resting in his lap. The room is not cold, but it is cooler now than it was during the day. The thick stone walls of the temple have released most of their stored heat, and the night air seeping in through the high windows carries the first true chill of the evening. Amenhotep wraps his linen cloak more closely around himself and then turns his attention to the work before him. Tonight, he will continue copying an important historical text. This is not the regular accounting work or the daily records that many scribes must maintain. This is a text that one of the high priests has requested, a copy of the great temple records from 200 years previous, records that were written at a time when the temple was even more powerful and wealthy than it is now. The original text exists, of course, but it is fragile. Papyrus, when well cared for, can last many centuries, but it does eventually become brittle and difficult to read. New copies must be made periodically to to ensure that the records do not disappear. Amenhotep has been copying this text carefully, word by word, trying to maintain not only the meaning, but also the style of the original scribe. This is more difficult than simply copying the words, though. A skilled scribe does not merely transcribe, he interprets. He preserves the essence of what was written, and he does so in a way that honors both the original author and the readers who will come after chapter 3. The art of the scribe before Amenhotep can begin his work. He must prepare his materials. He reaches for a piece of papyrus from one of the rolls, not the original precious document he is copying from, but a fresh piece of papyrus on which he will write. The papyrus is made from the papyrus plant, which grows in the marshes along the Nile. The process of creating papyrus is itself a fascinating one, and Amenhotep knows it well because every scribe must understand the material he works with. The papyrus plant is tall and grows in bundles in shallow water. The inner pith of the plant, the spongy core that lies beneath the outer rind, is removed carefully and then cut into thin strips. These strips are laid out side by side, and then another layer is placed on top of them, running perpendicular to the first layer. When these two layers are pressed together with water, the natural sugars in the papyrus plant act as an adhesive, binding the strips together into a single sheet. This sheet is then dried in the sun, and the result is papyrus, a material that is surprisingly strong for its apparent delicacy, and which has proven itself capable of lasting for thousands of years if properly stored and cared for. The papyrus that Amenhotep is working with tonight is of good quality. It is smooth and evenly made, without the lumps and rough spots that indicate careless manufacture. It has a warm cream color, which will provide an excellent background for the black ink he uses for most of his writing. He places this fresh piece of papyrus on his wooden table, anchoring the edges gently with small stones so that it will not curl or move as he works. Now he must prepare his ink. The black ink is already mixed and ready. It sits in one of the small clay cups on his table, dark and thick. Amenhotep dips his brush into the ink, removing any excess by pressing gently against the rim of the cup. And then he is ready. His hand has done this thousands of times, and yet each time it carries the full weight of the responsibility he feels. The words he is about to write are not his own words. They are the words of a scribe from 2 centuries past, but in copying them, he is bringing them back to life, making them current and relevant once again. The work of a scribe is not merely technical, though technique is certainly important. A scribe must have knowledge of the language, of grammar, of the meaning of the symbols he uses. He must understand the context of what he is copying. so that if he encounters an unusual word or phrasing, he can make an educated decision about how to interpret it. He must also have an almost artistic sensibility, an understanding of how the words should be laid out on the papyrus to create maximum clarity and beauty. Egyptian hieroglyphic writing is not like the simpler alphabetic writing systems that would develop in other parts of the world thousands of years later. Hieroglyphics are simultaneously a phonetic alphabet and a system of symbolic pictures. Each symbol represents both a sound and a concept. A skilled reader and writer of hieroglyphics must understand both levels simultaneously. A scribe like Amenhotep not only reads and writes these symbols, he understands their deeper meanings, the historical context that gives them weight. But tonight, Amenhotep is not working in hieroglyphics. Tonight, he is working in hieratic script, a simplified, cursive version of hieroglyphics that developed to allow faster writing for everyday documents and records. Hieratic is easier to write quickly than the formal hieroglyphics used for official monuments and sacred texts, and it is the script that most scribes use for their daily work. It is still beautiful when done well, still elegant, though it requires a different kind of skill than the more formal hieroglyphic writing. Amenhotep's brush moves across the papyrus with practiced ease. The words flow from his hand as if they have a life of their own, and in a sense they do. The text he is copying tells a story of the temple from 2 centuries past, records of the high priests, accounts of major celebrations and festivals, records of gifts given to the temple by various pharaohs and nobles. As he writes, he becomes a conduit through which the past speaks to the future. The sounds of the temple at night provide a gentle backdrop to his work. From somewhere deeper within the building, he can hear the distant sound of the priests conducting their night prayers, voices raised in rhythmic chanting, speaking words that have been spoken in this temple for countless generations. The sound is comforting rather than distracting. It reminds him that his work is part of a larger whole, a piece of the great machinery of faith and tradition that keeps the temple functioning. From outside, through the narrow windows, comes the sound of insects, crickets, and beetles, and small creatures of the night, singing their songs to one another. The air that drifts in carries the scent of the Nile, that cool, slightly damp smell that speaks of water and vegetation, and the vast, endless cycle of growth and renewal that the river represents. Amenhotep's hand does not tire as he works. Scribes are trained to work long hours, and their hands develop a particular kind of strength and endurance. But more than that, his hand is engaged in work that feels meaningful to him. He is not simply transferring symbols from one surface to another. He is preserving knowledge, protecting it against the ravages of time, ensuring that future generations will know what their ancestors accomplished. Chapter 4. The history within the words as Amenhotep copies the text. The words themselves tell their story, and that story begins to unfold in his mind, like a scroll being slowly unrolled. The document he is copying was written during the reign of Pharaoh Thutmose III, a ruler from what historians would later call the New Kingdom of Egypt. It was a time of great power and prosperity for Egypt, a time when the temples were at the height of their influence and wealth. The temple records from that era speak of vast quantities of grain and oil and other goods that were given to the temple as offerings. They speak of ceremonies that lasted for days, in which the pharaoh himself participated, making offerings to the gods and asking for their blessing. They speak of the construction and maintenance of various sections of the temple, the addition of new columns and new decorated walls. Reading these records, you understand that the temple was not a static thing, but a living, growing organism, constantly being renewed and expanded by the faithful. But what Amenhotep finds most interesting as he copies these words is not the grand historical facts, but the smaller details embedded within them. A notation here indicates that a particular priest received a specific land, holding as a reward for his service.